Hello everybody and welcome to FyneConf 2021. It's such a great honour to be back in front of you all. I can't believe that it's been over a year since our last event. How much stuff we have covered in that time. I would like to explore all of those things. But before we get started, I wanted to also thank everybody in recognition for the tough year that it's been. Thank you to everybody who's contributed to the project, whether it's through code, features, bug reports, or being part of the community and just helping it to be a fantastic place to contribute code and grow this excellent project. If you have questions during this afternoon, please do ask them. We have the YouTube live channel. We have Twitter at Fyne_IO, or you can ask in the Fyne channels on the Gophers Slack or Discord servers. We'll try to answer them on the platform where you ask, but also if there's a chance in between presentations, we'll answer them there as well. Sorry. Before we get going, I wanted to just start with a reminder of why it is that we're all here. The vision of the Fyne project. Why does it exist and where are we heading? Well, I think that it's a fine future out there, and let me explain to you why. Applications, especially modern graphical applications that we're so used to, they shouldn't have to be written per platform. They're not OS specific. Just like how the web took off with a build once and works everywhere kind of approach, the same should be possible of all other software. Apps should just work everywhere and only need to be written once. We don't think that applications should need installer software or libraries running on the application's host server or desktop either. They should be able to run just after download, as we've seen some platforms already perfect. There's an opportunity to work with modern languages and programming techniques to throw out the legacy problems that we've experienced in the past. If you've ever had to build a graphical app and struggled with main threads, memory management, all of those problems, they should be a thing of the past. We have the technology and the functionality to be able to do better. And Go as a language is a fantastic fit here, and I'm very glad that we chose it to underpin the Fyne project. All of those things are really important to this project, but also we would love to be part of lowering the barrier of entry to building graphical applications. It should be really straightforward to get up and running and build what's in your mind. In fact, we've had great success so far. A lot of the people coming to the Fyne project are telling us that this is the first time they've built an application and they found it really quite straightforward, and maybe even were surprised by that. Don't tell the no-code movement that we're solving this one. We think that applications should look great just out of the box as well. They shouldn't need necessarily a design process to be able to pull something together that you're proud of. And we think that the standard library of themes should be able to provide that functionality straight out of the box. We also want to promote good engineering principles, whether it's test-driven development, separation of concerns, or things that the Go tools provide for most applications like lint, documentation, and so forth. We can make it easy for everybody to get involved in software development. And naturally, Fyne and all of its projects are licensed under a highly permissive open source license, forever free and supported by a fantastic open source community. In fact, I think it could be summed up well by a quote on our website, that Fyne aims to be the best toolkit for easily developing beautiful native graphical applications for desktop, mobile, and beyond. And hopefully today you'll see how we're managing to step towards those ambitions and hear a lot more from the people in the community about how they are helping to move it forward. But let me just step in now to what's new in Fyne. And this is, I think, a bumper edition. It's the first time that we've had 3 major releases from one FyneConf to another. There's a lot that's happened since 1.3. 1.4, this was last year, included collection widgets, a theme update, and input validation. We then followed up with a very large 2.0 release where we included data binding, storage repositories, animation, and much, much more. Version 2.1, which I'm very excited to say is launching today, adds a lifecycle API, rich text functionality, doc tabs containers, a documents API, and many widgets as well. We'll step into all of these in a little bit more detail. Also, we launched a book at the beginning of this year at the same time as the 2.0 release. Thank you for Jacob's help and the Pact publishing team who were really instrumental in making this happen, and thanks to everybody involved in working through testing, reading, or suggesting ideas for it. As well as all of those, we have had a lot of activity in the community. On GitHub we passed 14,000 stars just recently. We have more than 700 members in our Slack channel, and we've passed 80 contributors to the project as well. All really big numbers and very exciting. You might notice that the version numbers on this slide don't represent the version numbers of a release, such as v2.0.3. And that's because we started grouping by API version. So 1.4 represents what was added in the 1.4 API version, and you will find that there's various releases after that. New functionality would then come in the next release. This time it was 2.0. And when you see the first number change, it is a chance for us to make major updates that might not match our backwards compatibility guarantee. But let's look more at those releases. 1.4.0 was the first release that introduced the new collection widgets. The list, tree, and table help to deliver a more performant user interface when using large amounts of data, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. We added other new widgets, the card, which replaced the older looking group widget, file item, used in a lot of places like file browsing widgets and so forth, and the separator, which you can see is being heavily used in the collection widgets as well. We added input validation so that you can give users feedback as they're typing. Not too intrusive, we hope. It hints at just the right times that they may wish to go back and check something. We added a color picker dialog to the collection of dialogues that are provided. And we updated the default theme. And this took the opportunity to allow user configuration of the primary color. The default is still blue. It's changed a little bit, but people can now pick one that better matches their mood or preferred color. And we also added a release subcommand to the Fyne executable that supports releasing apps to stores and marketplaces, which means that your Fyne app that previously could be bundled for your local computer could be prepared for releasing out to marketplaces with the same tools, not having to go to platform-specific build commands. Anyhow, let's look at those collection widgets. So you can see here is the table is pictured. Like I said, these collection widgets are for handling large data. We provided list, tree, and table, different ways of working with data depending on the structure of the data that you've loaded. It uses heavy caching of the graphical elements, so we're only ever drawing as much as is really required for visibility on screen. And because of that, we're able to lazy load the data. So you could have thousands or hundreds of thousands of items in your dataset and find no slowdown in scrolling or manipulating the data that's being presented. That was a big step forward. Anyhow, onto the version 2 release, the 2.0.0, which was the first release there. We added data binding, which I'll explain a little bit more in a moment. Storage repositories were a big part of being able to provide data from various different places into your application. There'll be a presentation about that later today by Charles. We added support for animations as well, and I'll speak just in a moment about that. We added even more flexibility of theming, providing the ability to customize icons, but also allowing the theme to be expanded over time. It was quite rigid before, and allowing more types of customizations as well. And we added validation and hints of what was going on into the form widget. This was a really great contribution by one of our new community members who was able to integrate it really well. So the form flows like it was a set of input instead of a lot of separate entities, made a much more natural experience. And because 2 was our first breaking release, we did take the opportunity to tidy up some things that perhaps weren't designed best at the very first release that many years ago. We updated to a floating point precision so that things are much more precisely positioned on screen, which really matters with high resolution displays. And we tidied up various deprecated APIs. Lots of information about what was changed is available in the upgrade notes for 2.0, which you can check on our website. So data binding, this sounds a little bit mysterious. Well, it was an opportunity to provide a better integration between the data types that you might have stored in your application and the widgets that might consume it. We started out with bool, int, float, rune, and string, which all map quite clearly to standard primitive types under the hood. And these provide two-way bindings so that if something is changed at the source, it will propagate out to a widget. And if it's connected to a widget that can edit, like entry, the data change will be pushed back as well. And this all happens completely transparently. We added some more complicated structures, such as list, untyped map, and struct. Now, the list provides a list of each of the primitive types, so a string list or int list. Untyped map is a map of string to any type, the interface type in fact, which could be useful in all sorts of contexts. The most intriguing is struct, where you can bind to an existing structure, and that's going to use an untyped map under the hood, but the API to work with it is oriented for the struct itself. And extra awesome was that we managed to connect the data binding to preferences. So if you want your widget to be responding to data that's originated, stored, or managed by part of the application preferences, you can use bind preference string, for example, and that will load when your application starts to be the content that was saved, and when you edit it, it persists it so that it will be loaded next time. A really handy shortcut. But let's just look at some code there. So, how is that going to be used in a widget? Well, first, we create a new string binding. In this case, we're creating a new string in memory because we're going to let the widget manage, the data be managed. We're not using an external source where we would use binding.bindString. And then when we create a new entry widget, we just use new entry with data and pass the binding in. And that's all there is. That input is now an entry just like any other, but the data is going to be stored and loaded automatically inside your application. Now, what if the data type that you have doesn't match exactly with the type that you want to display? So we added conversions as well. So in this case, you might find that your source data is a float, but you want to use an entry widget like before. So you would use the conversion function float to string. In this case, it's illustrating with format. And so in this case, the float that you have is going to be rendered to screen with the value prefix. And that is going to be sent to this label widget in the example here. So you can use a number-based data source and present it to screen, even without a standard format if you're quite happy to do the normal conversion. So hopefully those data bindings have helped people to advance what their applications are capable of. But also we added animations. You can in fact animate everything that you want. It's just a wrapper around a time slice that's optimized for drawing. We provided size, position, and color animations built into the main library. So what does that look like? Well, here we show how you could construct a position animation. This animation is going to move your object from 010 to 9010. So that is sliding along the x-axis. We're giving it a standard duration. There are a number of different durations. Standard is what you would use if you didn't have a particular reason to go faster or slower. It means that it fits with other transitions that the standard library has added. And inside the callback function, we're told the position to move to, and this will be called for every intermediate position as the time progresses. And then we call anim.start. You can stop your animation, of course, and there's parameters to animation, so you can loop it, you can automatically reverse it, and you can set curves as well. Let's just have a look at that. There is an animation demo inside the Fyne demo app, and here's what it looks like. We can animate the color and the size and the position all at the same time. And in the bottom half here, we show the different curves that are available inside the animation framework. 2.0 was a very big release, and it was the first to change certain items in the API that we thought we'd learned a lot during the development and wanted to remove or migrate. So it was the first breaking release. But it was really heartening to hear from people, to things like this Redditor who spoke up in Golang to say they wanted to say that with 2.0 the Fyne API was even easier to use, especially with data binding. And I think that says a lot, especially when we've been trying to be easy to use all the time, so to be better at that is pretty excellent. Now, having said that 2.0 was big, today we're launching 2.0.1. And this release, although it seems like it's got a smaller number jump, was just as big as 2.0. Both of them had over 1,000 commits contributing to the code. We have added a lifecycle API. This means that your application code can respond to the application start and stop, a window foreground and background, certain elements that haven't really been accessible before. And we're going to add to that over time. So if you have certain lifecycle events that you want to listen for, like a large change in time if the application's been suspended, or location change, that might be possible as well. We have added the doc tabs widget, and that means that you can now handle multiple files in your UI. It's a little bit more oriented for file management than the app tabs, which is more about areas of your application. Rich text was added. I'll speak a little bit more about that. And check group as well, which enables you to have slightly different input requirements in your forms. The rich text which you see there can be manipulated directly through a text segment API, but much easier is with the markdown parser that we've also added. So if you want to include rich text in your application, you can load markdown either from a resource inside your application or from a remote server. Other data sources are available, as we'll hear later in the day. And that's going to do the conversion for you. And I'll have to show you a bit more about that. And we added a document storage API, which helps you to quickly manage documents inside your application. And we'll cover that in a little more detail as well. Lastly, we added a build metadata file. Now, this was not something that I wanted to do from the very beginning because it felt like it was making things a little bit less transparent. But really what it's doing is it's just taking standard options that you can present on the command line build and putting them in a file so you don't have to specify them many times. And we'll take a quick look at that as well. So the document storage API, like I said, it's a way to help manage where you want to just quickly save application documents that the user is going to come back to. Imagine a text editor or somebody who's just taking quick notes. They don't necessarily want to know or care where it's stored in their hard drive. They just want to have their data available. These are going to appear inside the file dialog sidebar as well. If your application is using this API, then it will appear. And if you don't specify a start location for the file picker, it will default here instead. And these are the standard function calls provided. They're available under app.storage, and each of these subfunctions pretty much do what they say. you can create a new document with a name, open an existing document, or save out to a document that previously existed. And you can remove them as well. And then there's a convenience list function. So if you just want to provide your users a chance to see what they've created and maybe pick one of them without going through File Picker, you can do it that way. Rich text, yes. This one I just want to set through a little bit of code. I think it shows quite well what it's capable of. So we'll start our main package and we'll do the standard imports, app, container and widget. More details about them in the next presentation about the architecture. We'll open our main function and create a new application. Again, all standard if you've ever made a Fyne app. And we'll create our new window titled Markdown Editor. We'll create a new entry, this time a multi-line entry, because we want to be able to edit larger amounts of text. And we'll create a rich text widget. This is part of the 2.1 API. And there's a helper there saying from Markdown. In this case, we're actually not passing any Markdown, but you could do there a default content. That would be really great if you were wanting to use it for displaying in your application a rich label or something. And then our editor we set on changed, which is a function callback when the text content changes, to be the parse markdown function of our rich text widget. Now the function signature is to take a string parameter, so the onChanged tells you the latest version of the string, and parse markdown takes one string, which is the source markdown that it's going to render. And actually that's our entire editor. We set the content of the window to be a horizontal split with the editor on the left and the rich text on the right, and we show this window and run it. Not many lines of code there, but what you have is a complete markdown text editor where you're editing text on the left and it's live updating on the right, as you can see in the screenshot here. I think that shows the power available in some of these APIs. But before we wrap up the 2.1 summary, I just want to touch on the metadata as well. We've chosen to use TOML. It's the most human readable metadata format that we could find. Like I said before, it's about making your build commands shorter, but it is completely optional. It also enables you to keep the metadata that would be passed in build commands inside the repository. So if you're working in a team environment, or if you want to make it easier for people to get started with your code, then there's fewer parameters for them to remember. Also, because build number is part of the metadata, we can keep track of the build number, and every time you package your Fyne application, it will auto increment. And so let's just have a quick look at what that file looks like. This is a full example. More fields will be added later, but this is the start. You could specify your website, which is just metadata about the application, and then details specific to the binary. The icon that will be used, the name that should be put on the icon, and the ID, which is really important if you're using preference or storage, or even if you're distributing a standard app but on the mobile platforms. They require an ID, and I think Windows does in the latest versions as well. And we use a version number that is up to 3 digits long. If you're familiar with Semver, this shouldn't be much of a surprise. But if you're a Windows developer, you might be thinking, but I have 4 digits. We have a build number there at the end as well. And for most platforms, the version number stays the same and the build number increments. But when you package for Windows, it's going to append those two so that that would result in 1.0.0.5 for this build on Windows, and you would get a version number as expected. Along with each of these updates along the way is an updated version of Fyne Demo, which is really the best way that we have to showcase the latest functionality being added to the toolkit. If you don't already, you can install this or even upgrade your installation using go-get-u and the package fyne.io/v2/cmd/fyne_demo. And that's going to install it into your standard path. And you can run it using the command fyne_demo. If that doesn't work, check that your Go path is set up, or your standard path. Maybe check out the Go documentation if it's not quite working. If you do that, you'll see this, the very latest version of the Fyne demo application. You can see here that it just illustrates the new check group item. But if we just pop out, I can see what the latest version is looking like and demo it. And I think that you should be able to see here the Fyne demo application. Standard welcome page hasn't changed a huge amount, and these links will take you to the standard locations. We add new canvas elements here, and each time there's new icons, we add them to this list so you can preview them. The animations I demonstrated are on this tab here. And the file dialog that I mentioned is available through the dialogues area. I just had to tap a few approvals on my Mac there, sorry. And this is the app files that I mentioned, which appears when your application uses the storage API and doesn't specify a different location. Data binding, you can see various examples of how that's working here. And for all of the latest widgets, you can find them in one of these groupings here, such as the input, or indeed text, where we illustrate the marked up text and the latest editor capabilities. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining me for this first segment. We're going to take a short break and then come back with a brief discussion about the architecture and the design of the Fyne platform. I'll see you then in just a couple of minutes.